Good morning, Harvard, and good afternoon, Yale. Today we're taking the same thing that we did yesterday and kind of applying that to the entire world. So, talking about the benefits and the challenges of environments around the world. We're also going to be seeing how people use their environment in different places and how people adapt to their environment in different places. So, first, one big point that I'm sure you've heard before, you heard this in sixth grade, you've heard it from me in seventh grade. Rivers and water are huge in the global environment. Rivers are important for fresh water, for drinking, farming, for trade. People can go up and down the rivers and trade on them. Oceans are hugely important for trade and for things like fishing or anything else that involves the ocean. For example, here on this map, you can see this is Louisiana. This is when the French originally came to Louisiana. Look where they settled, right there, all along the Mississippi River. Why would they do that? Here's another example of how important rivers and water and the oceans are. These are the top cities in the world. I think top 21 cities in the world. Look how many of them are on water. You've got New York here, you've got Los Angeles, you've got 1, 2, 3. These ones are actually on rivers, even though they look like they're not right on the ocean. On the ocean. On the ocean, 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 on the ocean. All the ones that don't even look like they're on the ocean, they're on rivers. Paris is on a river, Moscow is on a river, Beijing is on a river, Delhi is on a river, Calcutta is on a river, everything on a river for drinking water, farming, and transportation. One thing that humans have to do, because they live in all kinds of different places around the world, is they have to adapt to their environment. That word adapt, that just means change. So humans live in totally different ways in totally different places because their environments are different. So like this lady, she has to wear that because otherwise she would freeze because her environment is really cold. This guy wears so much clothing because it protects him from the sun that beats down all across the desert. These people's house is built up on stilts and their transportation is boats because they live in a place where the ground is all water all the time. They have to adapt or change their way of life for their environment. So we're going to talk about the 3 different places specifically that people have adapted. You just saw those 3 in microcosm, but we're going to look at them bigger. The first is the Amazon rainforest, and that's in South America, right here. The United States is just north, about up here, but the Amazon rainforest takes up this whole space here. And that whole rainforest is basically covered in water on the ground. You've got the Amazon River that goes all over the place. You have like 3 or 4 other rivers that go into the Amazon River. And so people there had to adapt to live in that environment, and they had to build boats that they could work on. They had to build houses that were up on stilts so they could live there. They had to adapt to make sure that they could survive in a place with lots of rain and lots of water. It's also really hot there, so their houses are open like this, so that way when the wind comes, it can blow all the hot air out and make sure that their houses stay cool for them because it's in a tropical climate, so it's always hot and there aren't really seasons year-round. Second one is the Arctic tundra, and the Arctic tundra is way up in the north in the Arctic Circle. And here it's instead of it's the opposite of the tropics. Tropics is always hot, Arctics are always cold. There's lots of snow, very few plants and animals can live because it's cold, so they learn to use the environment that they had to adapt to it in order to live there. One animal that does live there are Arctic dogs, and they could use these as a form of transportation because they didn't have access to many of the resources that we did down here, so it was very hard to build cars and snowmobiles and things like that work in the Arctic. So they used the resources that they had, which were the animals that were there. They also originally lived in igloos like this one because they could use the ice to build a house out of it. And those houses were actually really warm because it would keep the heat inside of it. And so they adapted to their environment, changed the way that they were living based on where they were. Last one is the Sahara Desert. Sahara Desert is in Africa, also in a tropical climate, so it's always hot. There are no seasons, always the same, always hot, and always very dry. There's also sun all day, so they wanted to make sure that one, they were protected from the sun, and two, that the houses that they were living in weren't keeping in the heat, but allowed the heat to leave the house as soon as it got cooler. So they would live in tents like this, very similar to the way that the people in the Amazon rainforest lived. They're making sure that their houses can let the heat out as soon as possible. This guy also, as I said before, he's making sure he's protected from that very hot, very dangerous sun. So he's dressing completely in covering himself as much as possible. The last one are the Anasazi Indians, and these were in the southwest of the United States. And they, even though it doesn't look like a desert because you have lots of trees here, it was a desert back when they were there, and there was very little farming that you could do. They also had super hot sun all the time because it was in a desert. So they had to build their houses in caves like this to keep themselves out of the sun, so that they had used their environment, they used the cave to adapt and survive. So there are a few specific questions we're going to ask about how people use their environment in order to become more, in order to defeat an enemy, or maybe become more successful as a civilization. So the French, for example, chose New Orleans because they wanted to use that Mississippi River for the fresh water for farming as well as for trade, and they wanted to make sure they were close enough to the Gulf of Mexico that they could use that to trade too. So that's why, this is the same map you saw before, that's why all of their settlements happened right around the Mississippi River, and New Orleans here is the closest to the Gulf of Mexico where they could trade. Second are the Appalachian Mountains, which also had a huge impact on the development of the United States. They slowed the movement of settlers from the East Coast to the West because it made it really hard for people to cross over those mountains. So all the people that came first, they settled on this side of the Appalachian Mountains. That's why you see all these big cities, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Norfolk, and Charleston. All of those are on the east of the Appalachian Mountains because it was hard to cross the mountains, so they slowed that movement west. And another one that relates to us here in New Orleans was Andrew Jackson using his environment here and his familiarity with the environment to beat the British in the Battle of New Orleans. He knew that on this side there was a swamp, and so the British couldn't attack through there. He knew on this side that there was the Mississippi River, so the British couldn't attack through there either. So he set up his wall here and forced the British to attack him where he was strongest, where he had that wall, in between the swamp and the river. Last, you've got the Russians and Napoleon, and this one is actually one of my favorites ever, because the Russians were this people who were so used to living in this really, really cold environment, very similar to the way that we saw the people in the Arctic Circle as well. So their outfits were designed to work in the Russian winter. The French, on the other hand, and Napoleon, they were attacking from France, which is a very nice temperate climate, not very cold. So they weren't ready for what the Russians had for them. So when the French attacked, all of their wagons stopped working, their horses died because they were too cold. The French soldiers, you can see here, they're poorly dressed. This guy's down on the ground because he doesn't have any strength anymore, it's too cold. And then the Russians would arrive, like these guys here, on horses, dressed like this. And they knew that they could win because the French did not adapt to the Russian environment.